Freya, and today I have with me fiction writer and storyteller CG Salamander, whose short stories and comics have been published in various anthologies and journals. His first book, Palm's Foster Home for Peculiar Stories, was released earlier this year, and we're going to be talking to him today about his books, his writing, and life in general, right? Hi, CG, welcome, and thank you for
Hi.
joining me today.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Okay, I'm going to start off with where all things, for authors should, I think, start, which is your book. So I've read your book and I think it's fantastical. The stories are clearly the work of, a hyper imaginative mind. So would you tell us a little bit about what inspired your stories? I mean, where did the zombies zombies is still fine, but where did the cabbagism come from? If that is something I've said right. It is cabbagism.
First of all, thank you. Very kind of you to compliment the book. And to be absolutely honest, I have no idea where the book came from or where or how I was inspired.
Mm-hmm.
But what I can tell you is that I just kept writing, and I was writing a whole bunch of different stories, and at one point they sort of all just merged into each other.
Mm-hmm.
And I've always been a fan of zombies, actually, and zombie movies are sort of my thing. So I suppose that's where it came from. And but to make my zombie coherent and to make him the protagonist of the novel, I have no clue where that came from as such. And as far as cabbagism is concerned, I've always been interested in cults, and cabbagism. I just thought it might be cool to have a cult that's based entirely on vegetables, or yeah. So it all started because of that one line about the wordplay. Because I thought it would be fun to have some interesting vegetable wordplay in, and then what happened next was I had an entire novella on, well, cabbagism.
Uh-huh. And is cabbage by any chance your favorite vegetable also?
No, I
Okay.
hate most vegetables. I'm like a kid, I suppose. I think it would be carrots, but I'm not too fond of them either. So if I had to choose, it would have to be carrots, but very reluctantly.
Which makes then your choice of vegetables and making it a cult very, very interesting, or was that a new form of
Yeah.
revenge?
I suppose if you point it out that way, it does make a lot of sense. It's almost as though I'm venting out my frustration and on all of these vegetables. I never thought of it that way.
Okay. When I was reading about you, one of the things that came up about your book is, or rather, how you describe your book is a collection of episodic short fiction belonging to the comic fantasy genre. Now, to me, straight off, it sounds like a lot of words that I don't completely know. Maybe because this genre is not so common or well read in India. So, would you tell us a little bit about, what is the comic fantasy genre? What makes a book fall into this category? And what do you mean by episodic short fiction?
So first of all, the comic fantasy genre is popular, but not. I don't think it's quite caught on yet in India, but it's pretty popular abroad because you have writers like Douglas Adams, who writes comic science fiction, and comic fantasy writers are usually people like Terry Pratchett, who has written the Discworld series.
Uh-huh.
So this is a series about a turtle that swims about in the vastness of space, and on its back are four elephants, and there's a world on top of the four elephants. But anyway, that's just a small side note. And then you have writers like Jasper Ford, and there are quite a few comic writers out there who are pretty famous, I suppose. Um, I'm hoping that it will catch on pretty quickly in India, but as you said, it is kind of a niche genre because fantasy as a genre or speculative fiction at large is just starting to become a thing here, and fantasy humor is a or I mean comic fantasy or fantasy humor is a subgenre or a subcategory of fantasy. And episodic short fiction is very simple. It just means that it's a bunch of sort of short stories, and each of these short stories are standalone. but once you read them together, they form a bigger picture. So imagine each of the chapters as one short story, but then by the time you're done with like the final short story, you've read yourself an entire book. So it's perfect for people who are very non-committal and don't want to commit to an entire book, and would maybe like to read a whole bunch of short stories. So yeah.
Very interesting. So tell me, I mean, that was one of those things that struck me about your book because, of course, I didn't know this when I started reading. And, as I read, I did read them each as a standalone. So when the whole thing kind of fell together like this huge big jigsaw, and you look at the whole picture and say, oh my God, and you have this really, oh my God moment. So when you wrote it, I mean, did you have this in mind? How do you go about writing a book like like an episodic short fiction?
So to be honest, when I was writing it in different parts. As in, I didn't go sequentially with this book. So the first story, of course, the zombie named Murli was, of course, the first story that I wrote. But the next one that I wrote was actually the fourth story, which was Farmer John's New Religion. And what I did was that I sort of kept writing all of these stories, and then I wrote new ones to fill in the gaps.
Okay.
So I had finished the book well before I had when I was like 40% into the book. So I had my ending written out, and then it was just a matter of leading it up to that. And then I had to go and rework the ending because the things that led up to it, well, it sort of just took a life of its own. And by the time I got to the ending, I had to expound on that. So which is why there's that extra chapter towards the very end, the epilogue, which ties everything together further. So.
Okay. Yes, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, so let's go back a little bit into your history and what led you to where you are. So you have a degree in electronics and communication from NIT Allahabad. So what got you started as a writer? When did you first start writing? What has your journey been like from the time you first started writing to having a published book today?
So to be completely honest, I think I started writing when I was about 19 years old. A lot of people say that they've started writing when they were kids, when they were 8 years old and 7-year-olds and whatnot, which is also fair. But then if you actually think about it, I think every 8-year-old and 7-year-old inevitably writes himself or herself a story. And so you really can't count that. But I started writing seriously when I turned 20 or 21, which is when I decided I'm going to make this my career. Before this, so I did my engineering and I absolutely hated it. It was horrible. It was okay, I'm not going to say okay, fine, I will say it. It was the worst experience of my life. But on the positive side, it was a nice bad experience in the sense that I got to meet a lot of interesting people, and I knew more than ever that writing is what I would need to do. So engineering is the sort of thing that pushed me towards becoming a writer. And I graduated out of college, and the first thing I did was I took like 6 months for myself, and that's when I wrote this book and I finished it. And I've been writing ever since.
So, you said that at 21 you decided that this was going to be your career and you were going to be a writer. Did you have like this landmark moment? Was there this Eureka moment that happened, or was this gradual?
To be honest with you, this whole thing about me being a writer was all based on one stupid rash decision that I made. Looking back, I sometimes wonder. I just turned 25 recently, and I was wondering if I would actually start over again. If I would say to myself, "Okay, I'm going to be a writer. I'm 25 years old. Let's do it." And it's kind of scary now that you think about it. But I think I was just recovering from my adolescence when I was about 20 or 21, and so it seemed like the right thing to do, and I'm glad I did it at that time. But a lot of people tell me that it's a bold decision to do. I think they're wrong. I think it's a fairly stupid thing to do. But I'm also glad that I did get to do it though, because I had I had no foresight or nothing planned for the future. But yeah.
Yes, I think I mean, frankly, if you ask me, I think it's some of the most stupid things we do in life that bring the most amount of happiness. And yeah, I think you were in a good place. You had very little to lose. I think the older you get, the more you think you have to lose, but the amount you have to lose
Yeah,
stays the same. So, yes,
yeah, I suppose so. And
good stuff.
yeah.
Oh yeah, it's. I mean, of course, I'm like much older than you. I'm good 10 years ahead of you. So looking back, I think it's amazing. It took us so much. Our generation and my generation took so much longer to take these hard decisions. So it's good to see.
Yeah, when I first graduated out of college, I told myself that I'll become a writer when I'm 40,
Mm-hmm.
and this is when I was like searching for jobs and everything. And I remember attending a few interviews, and they were horrible. Just looking, I think here's a tip for people who are going to conduct interviews in the future. They should conduct them in a place that's not in their office or in an isolated location, because just walking into the interview room and just looking around and looking at all those people seated there staring at you, some of them looking really sad, is something that I'll never forget. And I think that more than anything else drove me to the whole writing freelancing, because I figured at one point of time that I would not work well in an office environment. I've tried it. I've worked in an office environment on a contractual basis for a year. So I was a script writer, and I do not do well in closed confined spaces. And yeah, um, freelance is more my thing, I suppose.
Okay, so tell me, I mean, when I was going through your, I was looking you up online because, of course, I hadn't put a face and, you've used, a pseudonym. So I really didn't have a face to put to all this time. But I was going through your FAQs, and you list that there are days when you feel like a potato, and there are days when you feel like a sheep. But on almost every time you're writing, you feel like a Chinese giant salamander. So now, you've kind of, I mean, that explains why CG Salamander, but why did you choose a pseudonym? Why did you choose to, not put your name out there on that book? What was it that led to that?
I honestly don't know what I was thinking when I chose the pseudonym. I mean, I always wanted to write with a pseudonym because I think this was one of those fancies that I had or still have, as a matter of fact. I wanted to create a bunch of pseudonyms and well, make each of them famous, and then start writing with my own name. But the reason as to why I chose CG Salamander is because well, the Latin name for a Chinese giant salamander happens to be Andreas Davidinus,
Okay.
which is close enough to my real name, Andrew David. So I suppose you could say that my name exists within the pseudonym. It's masked within the pseudonym itself. And it's interesting that you pointed out about not having a face to put to my name, because whenever I'm contacted by editors or well, whenever I send out proposals or pitches, I get back the most respectful emails, because for some reason they think CG Salamander and imagine a 40-year-old man or a 60-year-old man in some cases, just sitting in his house and I don't know, and tapping away in his old typewriter that doubles as a computer. And a lot of people are very disappointed when they see me, because they look at me and most often they find this 22 or 24-year-old kid, and sometimes you can actually see they don't do much to mask the disappointment in their face, because they would go, oh, okay, it's you. Because and there have been entire conversations or where my editors have not known well how old I am or what my real name is. As a matter of fact, a close editor that I've worked with for about a year and a half still does not know my real name. It's never come up in conversation, strangely enough.
I can see that. I can so see that. And I think somewhere on your website you also talk about no hair. So it completely, I mean, I was in such shock when I did see a picture of you. I said, no, no, I did a double take. I went back and checked again, saying, but he had said no hair.
Yeah.
So, yes, I
Yeah,
can
I think
so see that
I might
happen.
have tried everything possible to throw people off the trail. So,
Okay, now tell me, you also, I mean, along with writing, do a lot of, you design comics. Is that right? I mean, I don't know so much
so,
actually beyond reading comics. So is it drawing comics? Is it designing comics? I mean, tell us a little bit
so
about what you do.
what I do is that I script comics
Mm-hmm.
and graphic novels, and that there like very recently a couple of anthologies came out, and I worked on this project called Zine,
Mm-hmm.
which is the first queer anthology, uh, the queer graphic anthology to come out in India, and another one was a tale of science fiction, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I've got a couple more anthologies coming up.
Mm-hmm.
And as for comics, I script them, so which means I write them. And how you
Mm-hmm.
script a comic is that you write in the dialogue and everything, but you
Mm-hmm.
also write in the image in the sense that think of a comic script as a tool of communication between the writer and the illustrator, in
Mm-hmm.
which the writer says, in this image there is a tree, and underneath the tree is a cow sleeping or whatever. And then the illustrator reads that, and then the illustrator gets a visual image of how this looks, and then
Mm-hmm.
the illustrator draws that particular image.
Wow. Okay.
And it's largely collaborative. And the best part about comics and graphic novels is the surprise
Mm-hmm.
that that are inherent to comics, because towards the very end, both you and the illustrator are shocked by the outcome of the comic, because you hand in something and what you get is something that's completely different
Mm-hmm.
because of the illustrator's imagination, and then it sometimes goes to a colorist, and in which case it becomes even more better because you get something that is completely different from what you thought of, but at its very essence is yours. And that's the most fun part about working with comics and graphic novels. And
Mm-hmm. Yes.
yeah, of late I've been focusing a little more on comics and graphic novels and picture content.
Mm-hmm.
So my short story writing has sort of taken a back seat, but I think I need to get back to it pretty soon.
So, I mean, again, I'm quite new to comics. I mean, I know I read a lot of comics as a child, and I think so. Most of my comics, or comic knowledge is more Amar Chitrakatha and DC Comics and all of that, which was way back. So, I mean, and I was reading that you'd been to Comic Con, which I kind of missed this year. I so did want to come. What is the scene when it comes to comics in India today? I mean, how is it? Is it a good space to be in?
Uh, so so Amar Chitrakatha and some of the older comics, well, those are like the classic days, and that was when Tinku was really good,
Oh, yes.
and that was actually the age, the golden age for comics. But then something happened. The TV set in, and then people started watching a lot of TV, and comics sort of took the back seat.
Mm-hmm.
But since the year 2008, I would say that there's been a small revival because of the number of independent publishers that have started printing and making their own comics.
Mm-hmm.
And in terms of the comics I mostly work on contemporary Indian comics. For instance, there's a love story that I'm working on for an anthology of love stories, and this one is based in an asylum. But actually, like, what I'm trying to say is that I have a lot of faith in the independent comic publishers,
Uh-huh.
and I think that that is a good space to be in. And of course, there are certain mainstream publishers who are doing a good job, but largely I would say that it's the independent publishers who are doing the most work for the comic industry.
Mm-hmm.
But to be absolutely honest, well, I, the comic industry in India right about now is still at its nascent stage.
Mm-hmm.
Or it's as though we've moved into a second phase of comics. Like comics have reached a peak, and now we're starting from scratch again. So I would say that it is a really good time to be in the comic industry because it is very close knit, and and probably everyone knows everyone who works on comics, and everyone is just connected to each other, and it's nice to have a smaller society as opposed to the literary world, which is huge, and yeah, and there are way too many people there. So comics are a little more cozy. But I suppose that it can go nowhere but up from here. Um, yeah.
Curious, and of course, I'm looking forward to your books coming out. Comics. Are comics also called books?
Yep.
Okay.
So some of them are graphic novels and some of them are comics. And the difference is that a comic is something that is by its nature smaller. So those tiny booklets are comics. The 21 page comics, and a graphic novel is a is something that is self-contained in almost novel size. And sometimes you can get a whole bunch of comics and trade and collect them and publish them as something called a trade volume paperback. But then they're often mistaken for comic books. Again, a lot of useless information about terminology I've given you.
Oh no, I didn't know any of that. So that's quite interesting. Okay, so now finally, and I'm thinking a lot of this went over my head because, of course, I'm not, I'm not so much of a comic aficionado. But when you watch Big Bang Theory and they talk about, so when you just said trade, in my head went like, ta-ding! Okay, finally that thing that I've been watching made sense. Saying, okay, now I understand what they mean by a trade copy. Okay, yes.
But Bangalore is the right place to be if I mean that's where all the good comics are coming out of. I would say Bangalore, Cochin, Mumbai, Chennai. Yeah, that's pretty much it. And Calcutta, I suppose. Yeah.
Good. So yes, I mean, so you're in a good place and close to a lot of good places.
Yeah.
Okay, so you were saying you were planning to start work on your next book. I mean, would you quickly tell us, do you have something in mind for your next book?
Yeah, so basically, I've sort of entered into a contract where I've done a whole bunch where I'm supposed to work on picture books. So the next few books that are going to be coming out are all going to be picture books. For instance, I recently wrote one called Ramya's Snack Box, and another one that I wrote is called My Classmate is a Rhino, and it's about this kid that enters class and realizes that there's a rhino sitting right behind him, but no one believes him, and they all think that it's just a regular girl, but it's quite obviously a rhino that's his classmate. But apart from all of these picture books, I do have something that I'm working on. I'm working on a larger graphic novel. Um, and this has something to do. It's again it's again humorous, and again this is like a world of its own, and it has something to do with a world of heroes and villains and the way they interact with everyone. And it's a post-apocalyptic sort of like a dystopian style Indian graphic novel. Uh, and then I'm working on another collection of graphic short stories, which is about witches and Indian vampires and stuff like that. But coming back to books, I think I told you this before. It has sort of taken the backseat because of all the graphic or picture based projects that I've sort of taken on. But I am going to. I have told myself that I will be coming out with another book next year for sure. And I was thinking of writing Gayatri and the Gods of Temples Past, or Gayatri and the Celestial Squid. And
Wow.
this Gayatri and the Celestial Squid, in which I try to establish a universe for where all of these stories take place. So imagine a solar system that's very similar to ours, only except in the place of the sun, there's this giant squid with a tiny, well, sun-like head basically, and on its tentacles are the worlds, the planets, and it keeps moving its tentacles about to sort of mimic the solar system. But the main plot of disagreement is between religious fanatics and science groups, because the religious fanatics believe that that it is in fact a squid that is at the center of the solar system moving the planets around, while scientists claim that it is in fact an octopus and that there is an extra arm and thereby an intrusion of an extra planet, which is sort of where this might take place, I suppose. I haven't really given it much thought, but I've got it somewhere at the back of my head, and hopefully I'll be able to write it pretty soon.
Yeah, good. That sounds like a lot of fun, and I think I'm going to be looking forward to that one. Not only the comics, but yes, also this one. I mean, it sounds so you.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so I mean, before we close, would you like to quickly tell everyone, I mean, anyone who's watching this video, where they can find you if they'd like to connect with you, and where they can find your book? How could they get a copy of, your book, Palm's Foster Home for Peculiar Stories?
Yeah, it's quite a mouthful to say.
Quite.
So the best way to connect with me is through Facebook. I've got a Facebook page, CG Salamander, and you can see a lot of comics that I do. And most of them are actually for free because they appear in newspapers and you could probably read them there. But apart from that, I think there is a contact forum on my website, and if you want to get in touch or just either work related or just say hi, you could probably drop me an email. And coming back to the book, this is Palm's Foster Home for Peculiar Stories.
Yes.
The cover is illustrated by a very talented illustrator. Her name is Sandhya Prabhat. Yeah, so you can actually buy this from Amazon and Flipkart, but I suggest you buy it from Amazon because I think it's a little cheaper on Amazon. I don't know if I should be saying that or if I can say that, but yeah, who cares? So yeah, you could get it here, and it's a lot of fun. It's got 3 novellas, one about the last Brit in India. So this story is about Nigel, who happens to be the last Englishman here in India. So what happens is that, well, one fine day he walks out of his apartment. He's wearing his khaki uniform. He's got his gun, his bayonet in his hand, and he's ordering people about. But only things seem quite different from what they usually were the previous day. And this is because he's oblivious to the fact that India has just received her independence, and actually India has just won her independence. Received is a bad usage. So, well, what happens is that he soon realizes that he is sort of a fish out of water, and that the country he used to live in has completely changed, and now he must adapt himself to an Indian climate because everyone has sort of left him behind, and he's all alone by himself, and he's stranded. And Nigel, the last Brit in India, is about the outrageous adventures he has here. And of course, Gayatri and the Church of the Holy Vegetable is about an evil cult, so an evil cabbage cult. That so after, well, let me just read out of this actually. It says, when the newest and most successful religion, cabbagism, threatens to bring about the destruction of the world, it is up to a melancholic zombie, a bunch of rowdy farm animals, and a whole lot of other outrageous characters to save the earth.
Oh yes, I love the chicken.
Yeah, so that's it actually. So if that hasn't sold you, I don't think anything else will. So do buy the book and let me know how it is.
Superb. Okay, one last question before you go. I mean, I have to hit my head for not asking this question, but I remember when I first received your book, what I loved about it was the texture of the cover and the cover itself. So, I mean, how did you all go about? I know you talked about the illustrator, but how did you guys go about even imagining something like this? So, how did the cover come about?
So I suppose in a way you could call this cover the very first comic that I ever did, because I think it was quite some time ago that we actually planned this cover, and I had already planned on naming it Palm's Foster Home for Peculiar Stories. So right, and I had this image of a hand, and then I sort of thought about representing each of these characters with each of the, with each finger, and well, this was not supposed to be the original design, as in this part was all planned for. The backside, however, was supposed to be, well, the same as the front cover, but the knuckle side, and over here you'd see like all of the characters and their butts.
Ah,
And
okay.
yeah, so it would sort of represent that all the stories are sandwiched between the palm, and I suppose it still does, but well, we decided to add like the a whole bunch of other characters because there were just so many fun characters that we could include to the book, and yeah, so that's sort of how the cover came to be, and yeah, like I said before, Sandhya is a very talented illustrator, and it was quite fun working with her on the cover. So I just hope that all of my other covers or book covers turn out half as impressive as this, or well, yeah.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us today, CG. It was such fun talking to you, and thank you for the light behind you. I think with that pseudonym, this fits perfectly because no one's really going to remember exactly what you looked like.
Yeah, I know. I realized like midway if I should like move my laptop around, and because the light is it started bothering me at one point, and I then it's okay.
But yeah, I think it maybe just works to keep you hidden for a little while longer.
Yeah, it's sort of it's like one of those videos that you watch, those crime videos where there's people and they're telling you stuff and they want their identity protected. So I suppose that's sort of what I've inadvertently done here.
Yes,
But like, oh yeah, or I could say that it was a very strategic thing for me to do. It was all planned beforehand. And thank you so much for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
This is the